right, I thought the day was over, but then New York Nipple Judge Engoron had to go issue a ruling denying Trump's request for a stay of his $450 million ruling in the Leticia James persecution. We'll get there in a second. Starting this vlog off with a little story time. When I was a teenager, I was a bit of a loner, among other things, and I used to go see movies alone in the theater multiple times. I saw Pulp Fiction 7 times in the theater. I saw Trainspotting 6 times in the theater. And one time, when I'm watching Trainspotting, I'm sitting there alone, and there's an older man sitting next to me, and he starts talking to me. He says, "Who are you here with alone?" Actually, in retrospect, it was kind of weird. Whatever. It turned out that the guy was a psychiatrist. And he starts talking and he says, there's a risk of watching movies like this when you compare your lives to people who lead morally questionable lives at a higher degree. You run into the tendency of forgiving yourself or tolerating within your own conduct behavior which on its own would be intolerable or questionable behavior because you compare it against people who do much, much worse things. So some people can say, well, I can drink, I can smoke weed, whatever, because at least I'm not in Trainspotting heroin addict type thing. That is more applicable today than I could have appreciated it would have been at the time, because what we now are in the process of witnessing is an entire political party, a political apparatus saying, well, at least we don't poison our political rivals here in America like they allegedly do in Russia. We don't poison our political rivals in America. We just try to bankrupt them through kangaroo court hearings. We just try to put them away for the rest of their lives in jail. But at least we don't poison them, so we are the morally righteous ones because there's somebody out there who we say is worse than us, so we can tolerate our own improper conduct. This New York Nipple Judge Engoron ruling, refusing to stay his ridiculous ruling in the ridiculous persecution from Leticia James, a case which is not just a victimless, alleged fraud crime. There was no fraud, there was no crime, there was no victim. But nonetheless, Leticia James took it upon herself to lay down the ambiguous, subjective letter of the law to take Donald Trump and fine him $450 million, $355 million as a disgorgement penalty for allegedly overvaluing his assets so that he would get preferential interest rates from the banks. The banks didn't complain. The banks were happy. The banks made millions. There is no victim here. There is no fraud here. There is no crime here. But because we are living through communism in action, CIA out of New York, find me the person, I will find you the crime. But at least we're not poisoning them. In the context of this case where New York Nipple Judge came down and issued a ruling of $355 million fine in disgorgement for ill-gotten gains, $98 million in pre-judgment interest at a rate of 9%. Well, as one would imagine, the Trump team asked the judge, Engoron, to stay his decision for an additional 30 days, I believe. They're going to appeal this, obviously, but the only problem is, in order to appeal, they either have to post the entire amount of the judgment, including interest, in court, or get a bond, which would require them to put up 10% of it, so that the rest would be secured by a bond, which itself would come with incredible fees in the order of tens of millions of dollars. Everybody knows this. It's by design, it's part of the game. Bankrupt him. But at least we're not poisoning him. Well, Trump's team asked for a stay of the decision, and New York Nipple Judge issued his ruling by way of email. No. From Clifford Robert to Honorable Arthur Engoron.
All rise for the Honorable Judge Marshall Stevens.
Honorable.
Dear Justice Engoron, we are in receipt of your email where the court does not address the defendant's request for a temporary stay of enforcement of the judgment necessary to protect defendant's appellate rights and ensure an orderly post-judgment process. As the court is well aware, the monitor that the court appointed remains in place. As such, there is no exigency or potential prejudice to the Attorney General from a brief stay of enforcement of the judgment. To the contrary, the prejudice to the defendants is considerable. Respectfully, Clifford S. Robert. To which, after thoughtful consideration, New York Nipple Judge Engoron writes as follows. Dear Mr. Robert, you have failed to explain, much less justify, any basis for a stay. I am confident that the appellate division will protect your appellate rights. Justice Engoron. Failed to explain, much less justify, any basis for a stay. Everything about this decision is a basis for a stay. The sheer quantum of the award, the fact that it would in fact be in everyone's best interest to stay it, allow business to continue as usual in the unlikely event, although I think it's going to happen, that the Court of Appeal overturns this ridiculous decision. The outrageous quantum of this provision of law that I don't know if it's ever been used under similar circumstances, that is the basis, that is the justification for the stay. But New York Nipple Judge Engoron, who has all the tools to do what he wants to do, and that is bankrupt Donald Trump. Make sure that he is never president again. Make sure that he is ruined, utterly destroyed for having had the audacity of run for president. That is what New York Nipple Judge Engoron wants to do. He's got all the tools to do it, so he swiftly, in 2 sentences, says, no stay of this. Now you've got to put up the amount or the bond and go to appeal. Oh, but I'm sure the appellate court will protect your rights. That's a little wink, wink, nudge, nudge. The New York appellate court is probably just as corrupt as Engoron. This entire thing is outrageous. Anyone out there cheering this on is a TDS-afflicted human. I made the tweet a moment ago that TDS is the political equivalent of rabies. It turns normal people into raging, frothing at the mouth, rabid animals, because that's exactly what happened. There were people out there screaming and crying about how Brittany Griner got convicted, sentenced to an outrageous sentence in Russia for smuggling drugs into Russia. People were outraged about that. They went and traded the merchant of death to get her out of there. The very same people who complained about that purported injustice are now cheering this one on with open arms because it's an enemy of their choice. They are cheering on the literal descent into kangaroo court's banana republic, but they're doing it because they hate the object of it this time and think that it can never happen to them. And they also say, well, at least we're not poisoning him. It is an objective outrage. It's an objective, egregious injustice. Anybody out there cheering this on is no better than Kim Jong-un, and the fact that you, at the very least, are not poisoning your political rivals, you're not much better, people. You're in the same direction, just not the same distance. And as they say, history doesn't repeat, but it tends to rhyme. And we are now seeing basically a reflection of what happened in the past. Replace racial prejudice for political prejudice, and you are now seeing the modern day lynch mob, and you are seeing the modern day version of the people who would have cheered on the lynch mobs of eras past. Yes, it's harsh words, but my goodness, are they deserved? Anybody cheering this on is a tyrant, an idiot, a buffoon, someone who likes injustice so long as it affects somebody else. Congratulations on the hell you are ushering in. My goodness, have the Court of Appeal better get involved in this, better overturn this outrageous injustice. And if they don't do it, the Supreme Court's got to get involved, because when people start losing faith in the judicial system, that's when people stop litigating their differences, and it's not good after that. So with that said, if you like my stuff, you know what to do. Like, share, subscribe, hit the notification bell. I'm going to go pour a martini. Peace out, peeps. Booyah!
I had one last thing to say about tools. A lot of what I do involves motions. These summary judgment motions I mentioned. And all right, am I following the law or am I making law? Okay, I'm following law. I'm an impartial referee, but it's hard to factor out my own emotions. And I have tools. Somebody can say, well, Your Honor, you have to throw out this case because it's just like another case. Well, is it just like another case? What if the defendant was wearing a red sweater instead of a blue sweater? Well, that's an extreme example. That wouldn't distinguish most cases, but there are other facts that do. Maybe the education of somebody who supposedly entered into a contract would decide whether the contract was binding. I have a tool that I'll call a tool called estoppel. Somebody makes an argument and I say, you can't make that argument. You made a different argument 3 months ago in this case, or even in another case. So I wish you all luck. I'll stand here or around afterwards for questions. And again, thanks to the administration for having me.